Hello, this is What It Takes to Lead, a podcast about Mike Sterlacey's faith, family, friendships, and business lessons learned over 40 plus years of selling insurance and building a rapid growth insurance agency in the Dallas-Fort Worth region. I'm one of your hosts, Garrett Cooper. Today I'm joined by my co-host, Leif Hurst, producer Charlie Hooper, special guest and owner of the Max Acceleration Consulting Group and a senior executive advisor to Culture Index, Mark Conley, and Coverica founder and chairman, Mike Sterlacey. Gentlemen, the day after the eclipse, how's everyone doing on this fine morning?
Waking up.
Yeah, we're still here. It was funny because whenever this first, we were talking about this a couple of weeks ago with the family, I was like, it's just going to get dark for a second. And then it's like, as it got closer, I got more and more nerdy about it. So
yeah, it's pretty amazing, wasn't it?
It was pretty cool. Yeah, it was very cool.
A bunch of us were out on the deck. I got a picture of everybody staring up with their glasses on. It was kind of fun. It was really cool.
Yeah. It makes you think, like, if this was biblical times and something like that happened, like, what would be, it would just be pandemonium. And then 5 minutes later, it'd be back to normal.
Yeah. Emily and I, we took Emily's parents to Ohio because that was just like Dallas. It was in the path of 100% of the eclipse, and so we kind of made kind of a long weekend of it. It was really nice. But yeah, it was pretty cool. I thought it was pretty neat. So let's jump into today's episode. So we have a guest with us, Mark Conley. Mark did a little bit of research on your background on LinkedIn, and you have a lot of rich and varied experiences. Looks like you spent well over a decade in corporate America with General Mills, followed by leading one of the fastest growing churches in the U.S. And then interesting, you followed that up by starting a successful consulting practice that strives to build stronger organizations by identifying the right people to come on board the bus, kind of Jim Collins speak, in so many words. So in your words, like, how did this all come about?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, and I appreciate that, Garrett. When I think about that question, I think it came about through a lot of different ways. Some being very strategic, very well planned out; others being complete accidents; others happening through success; others happening through failure. If I could go back and redo it, it would be far more intentional. But it kind of started off with, I'm growing up in a home, six kids, and my father was an engineer. He worked for what was then Bell Laboratories, so big company, and I
was like the original Silicon Valley.
It was, yeah. And so, but the way that I was raised, it was very much, my dad would always have this conversation with me. Is Mark, what you do is you get good grades in school, and then you can go to a good college, and then a company will hire you, and you'll have a good job, and then you stay in that job until you retire. And then you'll enjoy retirement. And so that was my plan. Like, just that, it was interesting when I look back on it that, other options were never really considered. That we never talked about entrepreneurship. I think my father would have thought that would have been irresponsible, or just any other option. And so that's kind of what I did. I went to school and went to college, got pretty good grades, and right after college, the bigger companies come and they go to the college and they interview people that have certain grade point averages. And so I got interviewed and I got the job with General Mills, and I thought, well, this is great. This is exactly the way the plan is supposed to go, And so I ended up spending 15 years with General Mills. And, it was one of those things where every year they would promote me, but that would mean I'd have to pick up my family and move. And so we kind of lived all over the place. And, Gary, some of the stuff that I regret or that I would go back and do differently is, number one is I would have thought about other options rather than you get good grades, you go to good school, and you get a job for the rest of your life. Like I always encourage parents to now think, as they're talking to their kids, like, explore other options, right? Think about how your child is wired and explore other options. And then the other thing that I regret is, my father moved our family around a bit because that's what you did. You worked for a company and you were a company man, right? And so for so many years, I would just pick up my family and move because I got promoted. And I probably didn't think much about the damage that it was doing to my family and my children and everything, because I was working the plan, and it was the plan all along. So, my brothers, one of my brothers went a bit of a different path. And, he said what he did is he picked where he wanted to live. And then he found a career there that he wanted to do. And now the advantage of that is all of his family is there, and he wants to retire there, and he can retire around his family. Where for me, anywhere I retire, my family is spread out all over the place because I spread them all out, and
Right.
so that would be something I would do quite a bit differently. And then so Garrett, so for 15 years in General Mills, when I finally kind of learned a bit more about my natural hardwiring, I'm not wired to work well inside of a large structured organization. And so even though I was doing well, I was always a bit of a rebel there. And it's about, I was probably 7 years in on my seventh physical move. And thought, I think I'm going to do something else. And Garrett, I had this spiritual experience where I was not really raised as a Christian, but I had this spiritual experience where the gospel was presented to me, and I became a Christian. And I remember sitting in this church, is in Minneapolis, and huge church. This guy was presenting, and he's preaching, and it was super powerful. And I remember thinking, I think that's what I'm supposed to do. And so I thought, well, I don't know how you do that. Like, I don't know how that starts. So I did a little bit of research. Turns out you have to get educated for that. I'm like, oh, okay. So I went to seminary stayed with General Mills for the next 7 years. And but I went to school at night. I went to seminary and got a master's degree. And then I was too chicken to pull the trigger, right? And so I went to seminary again and got another master's degree. And then at some point I was like, I probably need to pull the trigger. And what that meant was, giving myself about $100,000 a year pay cut, which back then was a lot of money, So I went into ministry, and it went really well. I started in Iowa, and church grew quite a bit. And then I went to a church in Phoenix, Arizona, and it really exploded and became this movement. And really, a lot of really great things happened there. I was with great people. And so everything in my life really to that point was sort of up and to the right. And I blew it. Like I did not handle it well. I was, on a very small scale, a little celebrity, with the band and the music and the lights and all this, and I just did not handle it well, and I blew it. So we don't need to go into all the details of that, but that was a decade ago. And so I left ministry, and I went. I had somebody who was a close friend of mine who was a culture index advisor, and said, "Hey, you should give this a shot." So I moved to Texas about 10 years ago, and didn't know anybody. And yeah, and it wasn't like I'm not an employee of Culture Index. It's so I don't have a paycheck from them, and I was like, I was just all chips in, like this better work, because I bought a house I couldn't afford, and I didn't have a paycheck, and I didn't have any benefits and anything, and so about 10 years ago, I started down this journey with Culture Index, and feel tremendously blessed. It has worked out wonderfully, and I'm in the spot where I get to work with 180 different companies and thousands of leaders, and am in a really great place right now. So that's a long answer to your question, but that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think that really helps our audience understand, again, just the many experiences and lenses that you bring to the table. So that's fantastic, Mark. Thanks for sharing.
And that's what's neat about you is you do have this kind of corporate background, but then also, you really dug into to more of a spiritual component of it. And coming from a large household, I mean, there's probably have you ran the Culture Index against your family?
Oh, I have.
Against your siblings?
I run it against everybody, Leif. Like my dentist has taken this thing.
Nice.
And is there similarities in your family of your siblings?
I'm the one that's very different from the rest. And I kind of always knew this growing up, but it explained so much. So my father is an engineer, and both of my brothers are engineers, and I'm the complete opposite of that. And when we were growing up, I always sensed that my father had this very close bond with both of my brothers, and he had no idea what to do with me. And we had a really rough relationship. Nothing abusive. We had we're a healthy family, but I never understood my father. My father never understood me. And so I always knew I was different. And then he passed away, and so we never really got the chance to unpack that. I wish I'd be able to have that conversation with him now, but I understand it now that my brothers are wired exactly probably like my father would have been, and I'm the opposite.
Yeah, if I can jump in, I remember when we first started taking these culture index assessments. I don't know if you remember this, Mark, but Heidi and I took it, and he starts laughing at me, saying, "You're going to have the same issues that I have with my wife." And I said, "Yeah, what's that?" He says, "You can show her 800 pages of empiric data, but if that's not been her experience, none of that matters." And I go, "Oh my God."
Yeah, exactly.
So there's something I've been wanting to ask about the tool, and just to kind of explain this to a listener, let's call him just a lay person to maybe indexing tools or culture tools. Can you describe the tool that you used just to help clients kind of assess the culture fit between what you're trying to do with an organization and how that candidate fits in that organization?
Yeah, and use Coverica as the example, because you've been with us 6 or 7 years.
Yeah. At a sort of 30,000 foot view, what we do is we measure the hardwiring of people in 7 core work related traits that are cemented in the individual by age 12. And there's different schools of psychology that says, hey, all this is in your DNA, or all of it's outside experience, or some mix. But where there's common agreement is those neurological grooves, whether it was DNA or outside experience, by age 12, the stuff we're measuring really is cemented in. And so we have an assessment that measures that really for the purpose of helping organizations make their most strategic people decisions, both in hiring and in organizational development, putting teams together that are wired to achieve the goals of that department. And then, we also measure who they think they're supposed to be in order to succeed in the role they're in. And so we can tell, hey, is somebody burning out? Is somebody feeling like, man, every day I go to work and I have to have this out of body experience to do my job? And that is a very difficult thing. And, there's so much, first of all, these assessments have got so much more accurate. When I started with General Mills, I had to take the assessments that were in the market in 1984, which and I don't want to mention their names. I don't mean to disparage any other organization because those assessments are still around, but the validity at that point was really in the 60 percentile. And so, acceptable variance of almost 40% on the data, which is pretty inaccurate, And so Culture Index was formed out of an assessment that was built by Dr. Janda in 2004, and it has a 90% validity. So really different validity. And it's just the industry has come such a long way. And so we're really able to use that to, again, make the most strategic decisions and really not only to help the organizations, but the people. There's so much good data out there about how the American workforce is feeling about their work right now. And I just think it's fascinating. Like 75% of the American workforce is disengaged from their work. And half of the workforce, think about that, Mike. Think about Coverica is probably different, but what if half of the people at Coverica were going home tonight and getting on Indeed and looking for another job? Because that's the case for the American workforce. And when you dig deeper about why that's happening, there are several reasons, but one of the key reasons is people find themselves in positions where they're not able to play to their strengths, and they're going to work every day doing something they don't want to do. And we're trying to help individuals and organizations fix that so that people are more engaged in their work. So when you're playing to your strengths, you're going to be more engaged, and that's when you're at your best.
Mike, let's kind of pick it up from your side, right? So Mark's kind of talked about it from, the obviously the experts, I hate using the word vendor, but, from the vendor side, but how did you learn of this tool, this process, and ultimately come to hire, Mark and the process that he brings with him?
We host it was Biz Ed, and they were starting a company where they would take 12 entrepreneurs and kind of guide them, young entrepreneurs that would be under a certain size, and they needed to get to a critical mass. And so Jay put this together, and at one point he had as a guest speaker, it wasn't Mark, but was one of the Culture Index founders, I think. And he was explaining how it works. And it was fascinating to me. And so I reached out to learn more about it. And that's where I guess that's how you and I got started, Mark, way back when.
It is.
So and of course, I've been reminded this from a lot of people. I've been thinking about the perpetuation of the company now for decades. And that's a critical piece of replicating what I might have done or thought about and improving it. See, the thing in any business as it evolves, you have to deal with where you are. I was thinking earlier, John Pappas was one of the guys over at SIAA, would joke about how SIAA, when they first started, they would bring anybody that could breathe to join. And then as they became larger and larger and more critical, they got more and more specific. And so with us, I knew that we needed to get something that would help the workers communicate better with each other. In other words, like you and I have talked, Garrett, I mean, you're a persuader, David's a architect, and there's some inherent challenges there because of the way you process data and communicate. So this was a third party, very highly respected and accurate opportunity that the staff here could look at and say, oh, and we even have them on our desks, for example. I'm a trailblazer. And so there are certain things you'll know about a trailblazer. And then you'll have somebody who's an architect. You'll know certain things about them or all the points in between. So I recognize that was a critical need for the future when essentially I retire. If, in fact, the company is not for sale and it's wanting to perpetuate. How do you help the staff with their hiring and helping the employees really fulfill their gifts?
Very cool. And so, Mike, just as a follow-up to that, I mean, what would you say, I mean, in your experience, again, seeing the tool rolled out, seeing the tool used over the years, maybe some of the wins or some of the examples that you point to say, hey, like this is where it's worth its weight in gold?
Well, okay. That would be the first precept, dying to self. By having these culture indexes, it allows me to just stop and say, okay, who am I dealing with here? What is their DNA makeup, to use his earlier point, which is set by age 12? And that's been a tremendous relief because I would, being a trailblazer, this is what I think it should be and we'll just keep going, not really realizing how it's affecting people. I remember Heidi's Aunt Struss. She's, Mike, you don't have to be so blunt. And I said, if you can answer me this, Batman, this riddle, tell me why some people love me because I'm blunt and other people can't stand me because I'm blunt. So with the culture index, it allows me to say, oh, this is why this person is offended by what I'm doing, or this other person loves it.
And that's actually a way that I've used it. Like, for instance, with Charlie here, is, there's a certain way. There's some people that thrive on public praise. They like to be the man in the room. They like to be, and then there's some people that just get destroyed if you were to do that in front of, 100 people. My wife does not do well with that at all. She does not like attention brought to herself in front of a crowd. And the way I know that is I had the culture index done on my wife. I've had, and so it was just kind of a thing of like, okay, not only does this tell me about this person and do they fit this job or this role, but how do I communicate with them? How do I praise them? How do I, if there is a challenge, how do I work through that? Is it best to do it in a public setting? Is it best to do it in a private setting? That to me was huge.
Yeah, I think a real key on this, if you get to what golden nuggets, is to recognize there really is substantial differences between people. That was a real, as simple as that sounds, it makes perfect sense that they process data so differently. And it's allowed me to not get irritated, whereas I used to get, why can't you see this? Well, wait a minute. So we had this meeting earlier today with the steering committee to eventually hire mine and Rhonda's replacement. And several of the people would say, I need time to process my questions. Okay. And then you have other people that are just throwing out, rattling off questions to ask. So being comfortable with that would require that I understand that person that needs time to process. It's not avoidance. It's not trying to not be responsible for it. It's really they do need to process it. So that's what another golden part of it. And by the way, I've tested my whole family and friends, and they, and plus being blunt as I am, I have a lot of fun with it. I remember what you said, Mark, when I don't remember who it was, but you said you looked at her culture index in front of the classroom and you said, you have all the friends you need, don't you? And she said, yes.
Yeah. I think, it's interesting. Well, most organizations prior to using something like this, they use data to guide all their other decisions, right? Their inventory decisions and their fiscal decisions and, every other decision, it's informed by data. And then when they get to people decision, all of a sudden it's like, my gut tells me this. And so what we're really trying to do is give you analytics over instincts in what I would contend would be your most important decisions of who you're going to put in what seat on the bus. And so it's, Garrett, it's kind of interesting. Mike, you'll relate to this is, I've learned over the years now that and one of the things I'll do with organizations, I'll say, hey, just take all your salespeople and rank them for me, however you rank them, top line revenue, closing ratio, however you rank them, right? And we'll put it on a spreadsheet and we'll take a look at their culture index patterns and we'll tell you what your top 20% look like and your bottom 20% look like and the differences between those. And to Mike's point, people are very different. And what I've learned is it almost doesn't make any difference what you're selling across industries. In sales, that top 20% almost looks identical. And the bottom 20% looks like the opposite of it. And the more we can help people on the front end to make those decisions, as opposed to putting people in the wrong seat on the bus and then having to either fire them or move them to some other position, the more we set them up for success. And then, the other piece is an organization that I work with recently, they had looked at every individual that they brought on as a hiring filter. They'd use culture index, but they weren't looking at the team as a whole. And so what would happen is, when we looked at the team, we'd go, hey, every one of the individuals you added to this team add value to the team, but you added all of the same kind of people. So there's a huge missing gap on this team that's terribly hurting your revenue. And they saw it. And so it's not only the individuals, but one of the real goals is to take a look department by department and say, hey, is this department built to achieve the goals that we have set for it?
Yeah, that's a good point. We actually saw that with the team that we were running internally is none of us were detail people. And that really we really didn't hit that detail person until you kind of joined us and brought some structure to it. And so, you look around and it's just, it looks chaotic. I mean, obviously producing results, but just from a management standpoint, there's just some chaos to it. And so it really needed some structure. So that's where you say, here's a team, this is what they're missing. Let's find someone that fills this hole.
Yeah. So. Leif, without that, what I found is people just tend to keep hiring people that are like them, because they like them, and then you have this very lopsided organization that is either struggling deeply on sales or finances or operations, but there's usually a major gap there. And if we can help them be more strategic to understand those gaps and bring on the kind of people that will fill those gaps, much healthier for the organization.
I think a key part of the culture index, because it's not like you go to like the vending machines and you hit F12 and you get a Ruth's bar. It doesn't work like that. So what it does help in real terms is you have an idea of what your needs are, and then you have a culture index matched to that. But what's been invaluable to us is I'll call up Mark and say, okay, here is this person. They're demonstrating or they have experience or whatever, and he could tell you, here are the potential problem areas you're going to have, or here are their weaknesses. And then you assess, can you work with that? And if the answer is yes, what deficiency do you need to find that quality in another person to build your team?
Yeah. Yeah, and the more you ask them to be the opposite of who they are, the more difficult it is to sustain.
Yeah, burnout. It becomes
Yep.
burnout. We had years ago a young lady, I say young, but she was working at one of our competitors, and I joke about them saying they eat their young. They're very ruthless. And she was making a lot of money, but she was working 70 to 80 hours a week. And she says, this is killing me. She says, I'd love to come to work at Coverica because you guys try and keep it to 37 and a half hours. I said, yeah, but there's a fundamental problem. I can't pay you because if you take what you're making, divide it by the 80 hours, and then multiply it by 37 and a half, you're going to take a heck of a pay cut. And unfortunately for her, in her case, is her husband was a cop. And so they bought way beyond their means based on her income. And so now she's stuck. So those are things that kind of enters into another part of it is when you're looking at people's culture index, will they burn out? Now, some people have enough energy to where they can play in both worlds. One of our producers is not a producer, but he's been incredibly successful. So he has managed to, over the, close to 30 years he's been here, come up with a balance of how he can function and still be very successful. But it's not a natural. So that's the part that I struggle with, that is we have culture indexes that by their definition aren't projected to be great, but they do fairly well, but still looking for that person that fits that culture index profile. I don't want to oversimplify the process, but clearly it is a very, very advantageous tool along with other tools to get the right person. But this is why the third way that we deal with employees is to help them build a resume somewhere else as opposed to the 3-strike rule. Because if somebody's not making it and their culture index says, yeah, they're probably not going to make it, and you're concerned about that person as a human being, what we would do is we'd go back to Mark and say, well, where would this person thrive? And then talk to them from a perspective of saying, we think you do real well over here, and that's not us. So let's help you build a resume so that you can get employment over there. And then now you have a win-win. You have somebody that when they leave, they're thankful, they find a job that they really like, and they'll think and speak well of you as a company.
And that's it's something I want to do. And we talk about this one word on almost every one of these podcasts. But I want to go back to the why. Like why, and I want to start with Mark on this one. Why is culture so important in an organization?
Well, because culture really comes down to how you treat people, right? And you can have the best strategy in the world, right? And I've seen this with organizations, brilliant strategy. But if you don't put the right people in the right seats on the bus and treat them well, the wheels are all going to fall off the bus, right? I mean, your turnover is going to be ridiculous. People are not going to want to work there. It's extremely expensive to keep having to solve that. That I forget who said it, but it's true, is that culture eats strategy for lunch, that if you don't have the right culture, it permeates everything. I've got this one a client that I work with that's in a very non-sexy industry.
Like
it's
insurance.
Plastics fabrication. Yeah, not even it's plastics fabrication. So that makes insurance sexy. And they have worked on their culture so much to the point that when you look at their presence online, it's not at all about plastics. It's about their culture, and people want to work there, and they have great. It's a lot like Coverica. It's not when I talk to Mike. It's not. I mean, we very rarely talk about insurance, right? Mike wants to build a legacy, and he wants to build a company where people are valued, and that that they're finding their best purpose in their life, and they're treated well, and people want to work there, and so without that, you'll have much more turnover. When people feel like they're underutilized or in the wrong seat on the bus, they end up in that 75% that are disengaged, and that's really expensive for the company to have 75% of your employees disengaged. And it's also miserable for them. I mean, think about what it's like to go through life spending, let's say, 40 hours a week. That you'll spend more there at work than you will with your family. Just statistically speaking, you will spend more time there. And imagine going every day, waking up and just going, I'm just miserable. I can't believe I'm doing this again. And when you have poor culture, that's what people are living with. And it's just frankly, it's a horrible way to go through life. And it's just a really crappy way to run a business. I'm so thankful I get to work with people like Mike that get it. And it's not just about revenue and insurance. It's about building a company where people are valued.
And Mike, I want to ask you the same question. Why is, and this is something I've even heard from the employees, it's just like, gosh, why do they care so much about the culture?
I don't know how anybody could accomplish their specific goals without getting other people to buy into it and to support it. I had an employee years ago saying, it's your job to raise the flag and it's my job to either salute it or move on. So I remember, John, I think John even said it, John Sutter in the podcast that we had, who John sued me, it's a funny story how that all, and we covered that.
Wait,
in an
John sued
podcast.
You?
Oh yeah.
That's how they met. They met in a courtroom.
Yeah. I thought you knew that story. Oh yeah. So I'll tell you that story on another time because it was covered on a different podcast. But essentially the point is he made the comment and he makes the comment that you can feel the difference when you walk in here. And that's not just him, that's the other carriers, that's people that come here. Now it's not for everybody, but it's certainly, we look at the whole person. And what I believe are just some fundamental issues. One, if a person actually doesn't hate their job and they kind of like it, they're going to be more productive. They're going to develop relationships among the staff. You then have people that really care about each other. So when somebody gets cancer or loses a loved one, they have other people that they can commiserate with. And so if you have a culture that is a positive culture that really is genuinely concerned with the fellow man, the first line in our mission statement, we treat others as ourselves, it helps you sustain business and make money. So as long as you're not hyper-focused on just making money and you're hyper-focused on doing good work and being pleasing to the audience of one that I serve, then all the rest comes with it. So that's why culture is so important. Now, I have seen where I've made some bonehead hires that look good on paper or had a lot of the qualities that we needed, but somewhere along the line went a different way. And so it takes a long time to regain that, perception of trust. And with this big transition that we're doing as a company, I've had, I'm kind of worn out, but I've been having a lot of one-on-ones with the producers. And here's the comment that they're constantly saying, which is, Heidi would say, well, you should be thankful for that and be proud of that. But I see the tragedy in it to where when they say, Mike, I'm here because of you, because I know you get it. Well, transitioning that synthetically, or how do we plant that into the hearts and minds of the rest of the staff? Because that's more important to me than the money aspect. So the why it's so important is because it's a culture that will carry you through the tough times. I mean, right now, property is a 4-letter word in insurance, certainly in Texas. And we're seeing increased rates to our client base that are just unbelievable. And so if you don't have a strong culture to where you can kind of commiserate with each other and help and learn how do I deal with this issue and just the things to think through, you'll do it more openly if you have the right culture where you can talk to each other, as opposed to cultures where it's, all about EBITDA, stabbing each other in the back and try and get an advantage. I'm going to take your account. That just, I've never wanted to work in an environment like that. So that's my why.
Yeah, and that reminds me, I mean, we had a lot of staff that came from a place where it's just like, no, you lock your desk when you leave because there's leads in there, there's accounts, there's information. And it was, it's just like, gosh, why would you ever want to work at a place like that?
Because I don't know that other places exist.
Exactly.
As part of it.
And in the absence of data, we tend to think that what's really going to motivate people are the things that motivate me. But if we take Coverica, for instance, and the highest levels of leadership, right? You take Mike, the owner, and you take Rhonda. Well, they are 100% opposite in their natural wiring. And the things that give life to Mike and excite Mike and are things that probably make Rhonda kind of nervous, right? And the things that Rhonda really, lights up about and is really, good at, probably bore Mike, right? And
Yeah.
you,
I was wondering what adjective you were going to use.
yeah. And so part of treating people well, if culture is really about treating people well, it begins with, I have to understand what excites that person, what motivates them. And if I don't have that data, then I might try a whole bunch of stuff that's actually demotivating to them.
That's a really tough question for people to answer when you say, asking them questions. If you just ask them questions about what do you like, what do you want to do, what do you want to accomplish, where do you want to go, typical response is what they don't like. Their thinking is the things they don't like, and they haven't spent an awful lot of time of thinking of what they do like. If they could answer what it is ultimately they want, then we can help build that in the context of benefiting, the second precept, everybody's best sustainable interest.
Yep.
But that gets to a point we talked about in another podcast, is you've also got to be willing to raise your hand and have that conversation. And there's so many people that, and maybe they all share a similar culture index of hesitancy to speak up.
Well, I think, and Mark, you would be the person to ask this question to, how much of personal experiences of a negative nature will thwart the culture index? I mean, in other words, this is who I naturally am, but when I act the way I naturally am, it's cost me jobs, or I don't get the promotion, or fill in the blank.
Yeah, I think it doesn't change their hardwiring, but it does modify their behavior. So, for instance, when I was at General Mills, I'm naturally wired like you, Mike, right? Where we're more of a disruptor. Well, General Mills has been around for over 100 years. They do not want disruption, right? So anytime I try to disrupt something, they'd be like, "What the heck are you doing? Like, just follow the process." And so eventually I stopped disrupting and I just followed the process, but it didn't change my hardwiring. I still wanted to disrupt.
Right.
Yeah. And I actually, I think it's Mark, I kind of want to delve a little bit deeper there in the sense of, we just talked about the why, right? And if you're a fan of Simon Sinek, and I know we've talked again about this on the podcast, we start with the why, we go to the how, and then the what. Just spending a little bit of time on the how. I'm curious about from a implementation standpoint, right? When you work with an organization, can you talk about some of the challenges with trying to roll this out? Because I mean, I can see for organizations that really this is brand new to this is a radical shift in their thinking, and especially as it relates to trying to be intentional about building a culture. So if you could just spend a little bit of time about maybe some of the successes and challenges you faced rolling out the culture index with you mentioned over 100 clients that you currently work with.
Yeah, the clients that do it well, and I think Coverica is a great example of this. It starts with they get our starting gun is a training, right? 2-day training, and Mike put the right people in the training, the leaders, as opposed to delegating it to an HR representative. He actually brought the leaders together in this, and we really, right in that training, started diving deeply into the data and how to apply it. And then Mike immediately, as he does with everything, goes into action, right? And so he takes this and he begins to think about how does this get implemented? And we immediately start using it for hiring purposes. And then he brings the whole organization together, and I'm presenting to the whole organization, and we're talking about, hey, how do we apply it internally? And whenever you have a leader that does that, our success ratio is through the roof. I mean, I would venture to say our recurring, people signing back up the next year for that, when you have the leader that's actually engaged and implementing it, pretty close to 100%, unless they've sold their company. That'd probably be the only exception to that. But where I've seen it actually, do poorly, where we go, boy, I think this was kind of a waste of money for this company, is they come in, they might not get the right people trained, and the leader, it really starts at the top. That leader, for whatever reason, gets distracted with something else and doesn't really follow through with it, and then it just has a really hard time. I use the example of the gym. I go to a gym there in Texas, and every January the gym is full.
Yep, it is.
And they're like, yes, this is the year I'm going to get in shape. And then every February, it goes right back to where it was in December, and And it's because when clients sign up with the Culture Index, I tell them, hey, listen, you joined a gym. It's a good gym. We've got great equipment. I'm your personal trainer. I'm here to help you. You reach out to me. I am going to be there to help you. But if you sign up for the gym and you don't show up, that doesn't work. And so
I would throw in too, Mark, is that in our case, Andy Bracken, who is a rainmaker. And do you remember what you said to me about Andy when you saw his culture in it? Go ahead and say what you said.
He's your CFO?
yeah, but say what he said. Do you have any good lawyers? Anyway, so there's a situation where after taking the culture index, and this is how I think we're very different than most companies, because there are no sacred cows here. So if you've got a family member in the wrong position, that's called nepotism, and it's not sustainable. But in our case, what Mark did, and it was kind of funny. He said, we need to, now that we've had everybody trained and we're implementing this, we need to, because everybody was scared to death. Everybody was, we're going to use this to fire people and downsize or right size, which is what they'll use in the bigger companies. But so anyway, Mark came up with the idea saying, what you need to do is take some people and share their index and let people talk about it. So I'll let you explain what you did and how it worked, because it was really quite fun.
You mean like when we did the rollout with the whole company?
Yeah. When you told that one girl that you got all the friends you need, right? So, but do you remember how you started it?
Yeah. So with that rollout, what I like to do is, bring the company together. And I think Mike is absolutely right. People, when they give you personal information like this, they're worried about what are you going to do with it? And so we want to put their mind at ease that this isn't a bat to beat anybody up with. And certainly, I don't think in the history of any client did they say, well, your performance is strong, but your culture index says it wouldn't be. And so you're demoted, right? Like that. It's never used that way, right? It's really to set people up for success. So in the rollout, what we do is we want to disarm people, kind of put myths aside and just go, hey, this is what this data means. And I kind of have fun with everybody's profile. And I'll pick somebody who's very highly social and talk about how they're the life of the party, where they change the temperature of the room. And then I'll pick somebody, Mike, this is probably, I forget who it was, but a very low sociability person and go, hey, listen, you have all the friends you need, right? All the friends you want, not taking new applications. If you want another friend, you get another dog, or something like that. And because everybody sort of laughs because they know these things are true of these people. They've been working with them for a while. But by the end, what I'm trying to do is, while we're having fun with it, I'm also trying to give everybody a unique set of strengths that they possess, and they're taking notes. And the hope is that they walk out of that meeting going, you know what, I am uniquely made. And I do have a set of unique strengths here that I probably should be leveraging. And that's the win.
And the other part of it is that the culture index, the more extreme your characteristics, the more predictable you are.
Yeah.
So he actually started with showing my culture index. And Leif, it was like this. Yeah, Leif says, Monty, I can solve this who this mystery guest is.
Yeah, I'd like to solve the puzzle. And that's the thing is, I mean, it really does come down to, it's like you can use a screwdriver as a hammer. But man, it's just easier just to grab a hammer.
That's a great analogy. I'm going to use that.
Yeah, that one comes from my father. So, so there was something I wanted to, just because we did bring up Mike's culture index. You came back as a trailblazer. Did that profile or any of the strengths or weaknesses of that profile surprise you at all?
Not at all.
And yeah,
no, I can't play well in other sandboxes. I really can't. If somebody's competent and they're doing a good job, I don't have a problem following them at all. But when they start doing stupid things, no, we're not going to do that. Actually, that goes back to when I started at what was then Maxim Agency. I think I mentioned this in some of the other podcasts, but the way that they were handling commercial insurance is you would change your CSR based on an alphabet split. And you know me pretty well, and I was not as, I don't know, I guess you could say I wasn't as mature back then, but I just said, we are not doing it this way. I had no authority to say that, but I said it anyway. And so the president of the agency and I were arguing it. I said, you don't understand commercial insurance, obviously, because there's relationships being built between the service staff and these customers. And if you change that relationship, they're not going to be happy. And so that is an example of just being so autonomous and not caring what he thought that I just jumped into it. So,
But have you seen, because you're right. I mean, you've got your culture index framed on your desk, and it's almost like a thing of like,
it's a warning.
Hey, well, it's more of an instruction guide of like, this is how you play with this toy.
That's exactly right.
Has anybody said that to you of just like, well, your culture index is like this, so I'm coming at you a little differently, or?
I don't know that I've ever heard it phrased that way, but I will tell you with my wife, I mentioned Mark and his wife and Mark, but Heidi looked, when she finally understood and went to the training for Culture Index, she says, "You know what this says, Mike?" And I said, "What?" She says, "I don't have to know any of this stuff. It's your problem."
Yeah.
So that's actually something I wanted to ask here at the end is Mark, I mean, in your years of doing this, and that's something that I think is unique. It is, you really almost are like a personality coach for businesses to say, hey, we're looking at this candidate. What does this mean? Is this maybe the interview is not matching what the culture index says, or they're this, and how would they play with this position, even though it's not an exact match? But can you tell some stories about maybe just kind of interesting ways you've seen culture index used almost kind of like off label? Like as an example, my son's 15. Like, would this be a good time to culture index him to figure out what's this kid going to do with his life?
Yeah. So you mean some,
or used in marriages, or?
Yeah, just to follow on that too. I mean, do you ever hear from people, Mark, after the fact saying, "Hey, I took this and I made this radical shift in my life because I realized these are my strengths and I'd been not using them all along."
Yeah, my own family, right? But typically the first thing people do after the training is they survey all the people that are important in their life, and it explains so much. So my daughter, I was always, she can be pretty engaging, and I was always saying, you should be in sales. You should go in sales. And so she was pursuing that degree. She was in college, and she took this survey, and she came back with a profile we call technical expert, which is a very serious, very introspective, very analytic kind of profile. And I was like, I think this is wrong, right? And so I read it to her, and she goes, "No, that's absolutely right. But Dad, you think I'm social because I only let a couple people in my inner circle, and you're in that." But when she goes out to to school and these other things, she is the other people know her as technical expert. So I kind of missed it. Well, anyway, she changed her major in college. She is now the physics and chemistry, advanced chemistry and physics teacher at Grapevine High School there in Texas.
Oh, wow. Cool.
Oh, how cool.
But she's in her sweet spot, right? I would have been pushing her towards sales, and she probably would have failed miserably there. Just personally, and I mean, just kind of saying on my own family, when I had my profile read back to me, it was somebody that was reading both my profile and my wife's profile, and we were both in the same room. And what's interesting is when he was reading her profile, I was thinking like, "Oh my gosh, this is terrible. Are you okay? Like, I can't believe he's saying these things about you. This is horrible." And she's listening to it going, "Yeah, that's exactly how human beings should be. Everybody should be exactly like that." Like, oh, okay, this explains a lot, and he was reading mine, and I was thinking, "Oh, this explains every good decision and every bad decision I've ever made." And my wife is just going, "Oh, okay." And it explained a lot about even how we navigate conflict, right? So I'm very much like Mike. We're very future thinking to the point where we can forget the past very quickly. And my wife is the opposite, very historical thinking. And so we would get in these arguments for decades, right? We'd get into this argument, and she would bring up something from the past and say, "You remember that, right?" And my answer always was, "Well, I know the right answer is yes, but no, I don't remember that." And so her interpretation of that is, "You don't think about me, you don't love me." And it was really good for her to understand, like, "Oh, wait a second, your brain just works in a completely different direction than mine. It's not that you don't think about me, you just think about me in the future tense rather than the past." And it was so healthy for us in our marriage. So, and I have 1,000 of those stories.
Very cool. And Mark, do you ever find that, and again, working with an organization, and maybe it's a leadership team, where the assessments come back and it's like, "Hey, maybe these two people don't mesh well," right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, I mean, where do you take it from there? I mean, I guess at what point do you sort of say, hey, I can take you this far, but then after that, maybe you need to hire another consultant, or maybe you need to hire another outside group to kind of work through some of these issues? Just curious.
Yeah. So it depends on what the issue is. Like, for instance, if I go into a team and there's a particular person that's clearly in the wrong seat on the bus, let's imagine that's the issue, right? I always ask the whoever's leading that person, this conversation can go in one of a couple of ways. Number one is you're going to keep that person in that seat on the bus. And if you choose that way, then I'm going to coach you on how to help maximize that person. But it's going to be a lot of work, right? You need to be all in for that. And they need to be all in for that. Number two is you release them from that seat on the bus. Maybe you put them on another seat on the bus, or you release them to somebody else's seat on the bus. And that's another option. That would be a different communication, right? And then the third is, and I would say, I don't think this should be an option, but it is. And that is, you don't do anything and you just expect different results. And I would not do that. So I always ask them to go, okay, so which one are we talking about? Are you gonna take this person out of that seat on the bus or leave them in there? And whichever one you decide is going to change how I tell you how to implement the data.
Very interesting.
Are you seeing? And sorry, we're just like rapid firing stuff at you now. But are you seeing things as far as generational breakdowns of this age group sways more this way or that way? Or
yeah. The answer to that is no. And Leif, I think it's very interesting. I was about 7 years ago. I was listening to this communicator talk about millennials, and it was prior to it was in the last few years that millennials became the biggest population of the American workforce, right? But it was prior to that. And so this guy was trying to prepare older people like me for how to lead millennials. And he started off with this slide, and the slide had all these quotes on it, like, yeah, they don't want to work hard. Yeah, they're lazy. They're selfish, all these kind of things. And everybody my age in the room was going, yeah, that's those millennials. The next slide was the date on those quotes, and it was the generation before me saying that about my generation. And his whole point was, and I believe it's true, is that every generation has thought that the generation beneath them is a bunch of slackers. And it's just never been true. And so I work with young people in their 20s and 30s that are phenomenal leaders. And we don't see gender difference or generational difference. Our sample size is about 14 million now. And we really do not see significant generational or gender differences in the data.
Well, we usually get to a point of making some recommendations, but Mark, I just want to, if you can just kind of give a shout out of how somebody might be able to get a hold of you.
Yeah. So you can email me. It's M as in Mark, M Conley, CONNELLY at cultureindex.com. mconnelly@cultureindex.com. Just shoot me an email. Would love to give you a free trial of our product and tell you, give you a little bit of consulting on the people on your team.
Excellent.
Perfect. Beautiful.
Thank you for that, Mark.
Sure.
All right. Well, like Leif mentioned, as I'm sure some of our loyal listeners know, at this point, we usually like to do recommendations. So these are maybe professional development resources. They might even be things that we've enjoyed recently, personally in our lives, that we feel that we've benefited from. So we like to recommend them to our listeners in hopes that you will enjoy them and take something from them too. So Leif, I always feel like we get a lot of bang from the buck from your recommendations. How about you start us off?
Yeah, I've got two. Professional, there's a book out called That Will Never Work by Mark Randolph. It's basically the story of Netflix, of how Netflix was started. And you've got to put yourself in the context of we're all, except, I don't know, Charlie, you may have, do you remember going to Blockbuster Video on a Friday night?
I do. And I actually remember when Netflix was the DVD mailing product.
and you would sit there and you would wait for hopefully your movie would come in and never envisioning that there might be a better way of doing it. In fact, I mean, just to tell you, I mean, my kids are 12 and 15. It's funny, we were watching a show last night and my son goes, go back. And I go, rewind. And he goes, what? And just differences in terminology because they've always known this like menu of everything. And it's at your fingertips on every device. And I remember going and sitting there and waiting at Blockbuster for an hour for a copy of
A new release.
Forrest Gump to come in or something like that. But it really does kind of tell that story of the context of the time. So really good, a good book to look through. On a personal note, we got sucked into a show that came out in 2020 called The Outsider, which is a Stephen King book. And they did a show on HBO on it. And if you're a fan of Ozark, it's almost all the same people from Ozark that made it, as well as that is cast in it. But it's a murder mystery that turns into kind of a supernatural spiritual battle. And it was very, very, very cool. It was one of those things we started on a Thursday and it was like clear Saturday because we're,
binge watching.
We're binging. And so, but yeah, really good show, well acted, very cinematic. So very cool.
Very cool. Charlie, what do you got for us?
Yeah. Also, that sounds right up my alley. I think I'll be checking that. What is that streaming on?
It's on HBO Max, but cool. You can get it through some other sources. So
it's okay. I have a Max subscription.
There you go.
So my recommendation this week is Salesforce Trailhead. I have recently gotten a renewed interest in this one. Our new CTO is saying all research and learning has to be done outside hours. So I've been logging on every evening, kind of just going through the dev platforms and or dev trails and architect trails. It's a real great place for anyone interested in Salesforce to learn a lot more about the product.
And what's neat about it is
solutions to work.
It's not just Salesforce stuff. There's stuff in there about how to run a business.
Yeah.
There's stuff in there about culture. There's all kinds of nuggets in there.
Yeah, it's great. It's just one door after another. You can always learn more. So it's been great.
Yeah, my recommendation, something that Leif and I are currently doing right now, is we're interviewing clients around their experience using a portal that we built for the Coverica Alliance agency alliance team. And so we're doing these solution interviews, right? Making sure that we solve these people's problems through the software. And originally was introduced that through the book Running Lean by Ash Moray. But I'm actually going to give a shout out to the godfather of the whole lean movement, which is Eric Ries. So his book Lean Startup basically started off a whole bunch of startups, many of them products you're using today. I'm just reminded one I was reading about this morning, Airbnb, for example. Eric Ries, Lean Startup. So he's kind of the godfather of a lot of these software as a service companies. So, and Mark, what do you got for us as our guest for today?
Yeah, got a few things. One is, I always encourage people to go, hey, let's make sure we're getting up out of the weeds and carving out time in our calendar for future thinking and strategic thinking. And then I realized, people can carve out their time and then they sit there and go, now what am I supposed to do with this time? And so there's a really good book out there that I think is a really good system to thinking future and strategic. And it's called The 4 Disciplines of Execution. I think it's an outstanding exercise for anybody that wants to be a bit more strategic and future thinking in their approach. For me, I'm bottom 16% of the population in conformity to rules and attention to detail. And so I'm not naturally self-disciplined around details. I needed to get better at that. Read a book called Atomic Habits, been around for a while, but really helpful for me to put some really specific habits in place that have been helping me for years now on that. Couple podcasts. One is Open to Debate, is one that I find is really helps me continue to be curious rather than just being stuck in one particular camp of thinking. And then this new one that I've really learned quite a bit about here today is this Coverica podcast that I don't know if you've heard of, but I'll be listening to some of those.
Very cool.
Well, I'll tell you, for me, I got to say, when I decided I thought for sure in 2024, the succession planning would be well in place and I'd have all this free time. So I jumped into a remodeling project, and I have sent my wife to Florida to get her out of the house for a couple of weeks because we're in the really nasty part. We're touching the whole house. I said to her, we're going to be here 10 years. Let's go ahead and enjoy it. So that has really cut down on my reading and research time. But I did pull up something, given the talk that we were talking about, the different generations that you said, Mark. So I'm going to read this, and I want you guys to figure out either who said it or what year it was written. And if you know the answer, don't answer yet. Okay, so here it goes. The children now love luxury. They have bad manners, contempt for authority. They show disrespect for elders and love chatter in place of exercise. Children are now tyrants, not the servants of their household. They no longer rise when elders enter the room. They contradict their parents, chatter before company, gobble up the dainties at the table, cross their legs, and tyrannize their teachers. So does anybody want to make a guess who said that? If you know it, don't say it. But
I know it. Yeah.
Yeah, you know it.
I'll let them guess.
Give me something. Like
Let's say Mark Twain.
Okay, Mark Twain, what do you say? Do you know who it is, Garrett?
I was going to say Dickens. Yeah.
Okay, Dickens. How about you, Mark?
Yeah, that sounds, just by the language used, it sounds something in the early 1900s. So,
would it surprise you to know it was Socrates 400 years before Christ?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wasn't even English.
Wow.
So,
Written in Greek.
I'm looking for a time to use that. But when people get so frustrated with everything, I'll say, hey, let me send you this quote. So anyway, that's it for me.
No, that's great.
Perfect. Love the recommendations. And by the way, I mean, we really should curate like an Amazon list of all these recommendations of books and things like that. And that way the listeners can have it all curated. Maybe that's something we'll have by next podcast or so. So just wanted to thank everybody. Mark, thank you for your time, for coming in today. It's always a joy to talk with you. And I've got a feeling this may not be the last episode you're on with us. So I'd like to extend the invite out. If you've got anything new going on or new stories to share, we've always got questions about Culture Index. And so just a joy having you on today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So for our audience, we just want to thank you for listening to today's episode of What It Takes to Lead. New episodes drop every other Thursday. Please give us a line if you've got a question or a suggestion. We're always open to new ideas there. And you can reach us at podcast@coverica.com or via X at WITTLPOD. Finally, if you like the podcast, please subscribe, leave us a review, share it on your LinkedIn, tell the world. Until next time, thank you so much.